Welcome into episode 53 of the Balancing Act podcast. I'm Dan Strafford. Today, we're kicking off a brand new miniseries entitled Communication is Undervalued. In this series, we're going to explore why communication is so difficult, why it's undervalued, and how to improve communication within organizations. Andy, pleasure to see you. How have you been? What's new?
It's been a great summer so far. It's going far too fast, and I think that's kind of happening. I don't want to project on our audience, but it's happening to everybody. I've got some great projects done around the house. Our fields of wildflowers are going bananas right now, so it's great to be in southern Wisconsin. How are things out in Massachusetts?
They're good. We were discussing before we recorded. I have not finished a project I started in June to put an exhaust fan in my garage/office, so that might happen sometime next year. Our garden has been flourishing. I've never had more tomatoes in my life. Tomatoes, I thought I planted peppers, turned out to be zucchini, so we've become big zucchini eaters this year. But it's been good. It's gone fast. Kids are back in school in 3 weeks, so looking forward to one last vacation, and then the youngest is in kindergarten. So all of a sudden, it's a whole new world of everyone being in school. So looking forward to it. A pleasure, as always, to connect again, though, and discuss the variety of topics you had. Obviously, Andy, this podcast has had a numerous amount of guests, some great discussions. And this is a topic for me, my career, what I do, what I've done in the past that hits home. So I'm very excited about the conversation. And with your permission, would love to dive in here.
Please.
On the show, we've explored so many concepts, the ego, critical thinking, new attitudes toward work, the reskilling revolution, change management, most recently, trust versus accountability. Why this topic? Why the topic of communication, and why now?
Well, communication is the thread that ties many of these concepts together. It's the primary tool that's going to allow any organization to move into that upper right quadrant in a 4-box plot of trust versus accountability. So, how do I get my organization into that high trust, high accountability quadrant? You do so through highly effective communication. And, moreover, we spent a number of episodes talking about change and change management, the diversity of change management curves in organizations. And a lot of that has to do with the diversity of how we process information and the diversity of communication modalities that are really all around us. So the process of change and efficiently moving through a change curve depends critically upon communication, especially within organizations. If the organization gets the communication cascade right and allows for the right amount of feedback and listening sessions, et cetera, then the change management process can be constrained and can be much more effective. So now's really the right time to go on a multi-episode journey and listen to many different perspectives on how to get communication right.
For context, if you would, can you take us back to an earlier time in your career where maybe you viewed communication as more of a necessary evil than a benefit or a positive, and what were the ramifications of that behavior?
Yeah, look, if you follow my work, I was much earlier in my career, I was the Andy said guy. I was very directive manager, much more very technically oriented. Let's get stuff done. All of the fuzzy, squishy, quote unquote soft skills. That's all fine and good for everybody else, but we're here to move the needle and get stuff done. I was that guy, as a result, who thought that I could say something once and everybody would get it. My ego was oversized. People would still accuse me of having an outsized ego. But that ego being much bigger than it needed to be meant that I actually did think that somebody was going to be able to get it. As soon as I said something, that the staff was hanging on my every word. And it may have been true that staff was hanging on my every word, but how were they interpreting those words? Because what I didn't understand at the time was when I talked and I was at the podium, everybody else was also I was thinking about me and my message. Everybody else is thinking about themselves and how the message applies to them. So were they really hearing and being able to process everything that I was saying? And the answer to that is absolutely not.
At the what acronym or WIFM, what's in it for me, is so relevant and prevalent in work that, of course, so when someone's listening, they're churning, okay, what does this mean for me? And maybe part of the proper communication is making sure you're letting people know, what is in it for them, or how does it affect them, or how does it change their daily work, and make sure that's part of your mode. But I think that's great context, one, for the journey you took. We'll get into more of that later on, but also sort of your own experience in trying to get better and get to a place that you can now share with others. What's your favorite mode of communication, though? And in your opinion, why is it risky to only focus on communication modalities that conform to your favorite or to your personality?
Yeah, so I'm talking to prospective leaders, to people that are leading organizations. You likely have a favorite communication tool, a favorite communication style, and that's cool. Mine is the written word. I love to write. I love the process of writing and the push and pull that happens as I'm writing something down, the total times of discovery where I'll write a paragraph and then, oh my goodness, something else pops into my head. That's a beautiful process to me. That process is probably maddening to somebody else. I like the written word because, for me, in my opinion, it reduces risk because I've laid it all out in a logical format on a piece of paper. That piece of paper or that digital file can get shared and reused over and over again. So the written word can form the basis for delivery using many other modalities. But as a leader, if you've got let's say video is your favorite tool, don't forsake the written word. You still got to write it down. And yes, video may be great, audio might be great, but the more framing and thoughtfulness that you can put in to your communications, the better off you will be, and the fewer questions you're going to get, and the better answers you will have when those inevitable questions come in.
A phrase that I admittedly butted my head up against in a previous role with a marketing director was create once, deliver everywhere. And I think there are problems with that in marketing, specifically platforms and audiences and all those different things. But I think it resonates to me here in that you can't forsake the written version of what you created, or the video or the audio or the visual, simply because you don't want to deliver it everywhere. And so you need to be thinking of, this is our message. How are we getting it to these different modes? How are we getting this to these different people who hear it in these different modes or see it in these different modes of communication? And I think it's a great discussion point of trying to understand that and make sure you're not ignoring something just because you may not enjoy receiving information that way. Before the show...
Yeah, sorry, Dan. Your job as a leader is to create an environment of clarity. And if you're a leader and you just had an aha moment of, oh, wow, that's my job. That is literally your job as the CEO to create an environment of clarity. And if there isn't that single source of truth,
Yep.
of what you of your message, then yeah, your message is going to wander all over the place. In my next book called The Balanced Business, we're going to talk a lot about how to create those consistent, logical messages that you can hang multiple communications off of, but you're coming back to that over and over and over again.
That's great. Great context and follow up to what we were discussing. One of the things we talked about before we even started recording and just in discussions about creating the show was that communication, lowercase c communication, can take so many more forms than may be obvious, right? There's so much more out there. Can you talk about some of those lesser known forms of communication and why you think they're essential to a healthy organizational culture?
Yeah, communication flows through an organization like the blood flows through your body. It's let's not take that analogy too far, but communication just pulses and courses through the organization, and it's not always an email, it's not always a video, and one of the most important types of communication is visual management tools. And my favorite type of visual management tool is in continuous and improvement and lean circles, what you call a Gemba board. Now, a Gemba board it's a whiteboard or a digital board that exists within a department or a functional area of the business where its goals, its key performance indicators, it's hot topics, it's blockers, all the things that are going on in that department are consolidated on that Gemba board, not just for the department to see, but for the rest of the organization to see. And, in my next book, I talk about the importance of leaders going on Gemba walks, putting their phones down and engaging with teams around their Gemba board about the good, bad, and the ugly of what's happening in that department. So, the language of business, which is finance, and the ratios and the key performance indicators and the metrics that come off of those are some of the most important pieces of communication that are out there. And later on in this series, I'm going to have a good friend of mine on the show, a guy named Andy Perkins, who we used to work with, and we're going to talk about storytelling. We're going to talk about how numbers then translate into stories that you then communicate over and over again. So, this concept of a Gemba board, visual management, being vulnerable enough as a leader to share the good, bad, and the ugly of your department with everybody in the organization. Take some of those artificial barriers down, and let's all work together. Thanks for listening to the Balancing Act podcast. I'm Andrew Tempe. In my book, Balancing Act, Teach, Coach, Mentor, Inspire, I explore the characteristics required of leaders who must find balance between strength and vulnerability, confidence and selflessness, passion and measure, and leadership and followership. Balancing Act is available today at Amazon.com.
Andy, you mentioned earlier about future episodes. Andy Perkins, who you mentioned storytelling, the man can spin a yarn. So I look forward to hearing that episode and more discussions around this. You'll be talking to more guests, to Andy, about communication as a learned skill. I think plenty of people will say, oh, he's a great storyteller. He's a natural storyteller. But I've seen people learn. I've seen people go through the process of learning it. You also will talk about the best way to grow that skill in a workforce. You yourself are a self-proclaimed introvert. So what was it like for you to improve as a communicator?
Yeah, look, communication earlier in my career was very scary for me. I was that guy in the conference room with 25 other, extroverted individuals all talking over one another. And I'm sitting over there dying inside, focused on a question that I really needed to pose to the group. And when am I going to break in? And oh my God, is everybody going to think I'm an idiot if I ask this question? Or if I get up in front of a group of people, am I going to say something that's going to completely torpedo my entire message? So that anxiety that the phobia of glossophobia, the fear of public speaking, is real. And I, as an introverted individual, I that has had that anxiety and continues to have that anxiety in certain points. I can attest to feeling that viscerally. Now, can you get past that? Can you learn to engage in constructive conflict? Can you learn to speak in front of groups of people and have that anxiety get reduced? And the answer to that is absolutely you can, and I am proof. Because if you'd have talked to 25-year-old Andy and right. now almost 59-year-old Andy, we were very, very different in that regard. But it is something you have to work on and you have to be purposeful about, because you're not going to grow as a communicator if you do not invest in that skill. And also, as a result, you're going to build courage and you're going to be able to engage in more constructive conflict within your organization.
With all that said, Andy, we've sort of laid context and talked about it, and I know you're going to dive into this conversation with the guests you're going to have on. In your assessment, though, what's the biggest opportunity, and heck, even the biggest challenge with corporate communications?
Yeah, I think here it is misalignment. It is lack of consistency in the message, and dare I use the word subversion. We're not always rowing in the same direction within companies. We're not always singing off the same song sheet. And there are times when a senior leader goes rogue within the senior leadership team. I've been there myself. We've been in meetings talking about strategy, and we're all nodding, yes. We agree. But then senior leader X walks out of the room and back to their team and says, hey, this is what we talked about in the conference room. You're going to hear some messages about this, but we're not going to do that. We're going to do something else. These are our goals. This is what's important to us. So when you hear that message, completely ignore it and do something completely different. And all of a sudden, leaders are pitted against leaders, right. And the organization starts to tear itself apart from within. And I use that word subversion, and it's very pointed. It's a very difficult word. And that leader that took that different tact might have convinced themselves that they're doing the right thing for the organization, right. But they are doing anything but. They are breaking trust, and it just cannot happen. So that's the biggest opportunity, all being together after constructive conflict, and the biggest risk is not being all together.
Right, a leader who tells their team to not listen to their leader is just setting up a culture that is not going to work, is not going to flourish, and your learned behavior, right? You see your manager saying that. Do you turn around to your team and say, hey, I know Joe said this in the meeting earlier, but our KPIs say we need to do this today. it just trickles down in a way that will honestly ruin a lot of relationships and organizations in a very specific way. I could apply duplicity to what you just said, right? Saying one thing in the large room and saying something else when you're with your team yourself. Way back in episodes 15 and 16, we did talk about the concept of duplicity. There's another side to that word, and you talked about it in those episodes. Can you help us understand why those episodes are important? And if you haven't listened to them, go back and do so, to the exploration of effective communication.
Yeah, I think this concept of duplicity does not get nearly enough airtime within organizations. Individual contributors, especially people that are new to the workforce, get really disenchanted when they learn that a leader has said one thing and then turned around 2, 3, 4 weeks later and said something completely different. It is essential that everybody knows that secrets must be kept within organizations. Now, you want to minimize the number of secrets that are being kept in the organization, and you want to minimize the time that transpires between keeping the secret and moving toward an environment of transparency. But my goodness, for a leader to be effective, let's say that you're acquiring another company. There's a very small team of people within the organization that know about that, and that is for very legitimate purposes. So sometimes you are going to be told something that the message will change 2 or 3 weeks later, and that's got to be okay.
Right.
We cannot be fully transparent all of the time within companies, but we can commit as leaders to ensuring that the periods of duplicity that we must engage in are carefully thought through. We're going to be an organization that does not hoard information like state secrets, and all of a sudden, information becomes power and we start fighting against each other with information. That, my friends, is a terrible, terrible result. But to imagine that duplicity doesn't exist is a fallacy. I've really enjoyed this episode, and for full transparency, Dan and I we had some internet issues.
Don't
and
pull back the curtain. No.
Oh yeah, we recorded almost a complete version of this episode, and it turned out similar but different. But it was a lot of fun. Now I'm going to turn the tables,
Sure.
and I'm going to interview Dan Strafford. So everybody get ready. Everybody get ready for
Stretching
this.
out.
Yeah. Stretch out, Dan. You are a communications specialist. You've dedicated your career to this. Yep. What about your experience with corporate communications? Kind of an open-ended question, but what works well and what doesn't? What have we missed in today's conversation?
The word I'm surprised we didn't use more. You mentioned, I don't know if it was in the first record or second one, but the C's. I think it was this one. The number of different C words we were using is culture, right? Yeah. And culture is such an important part of any organization. And there are plenty of gurus and people who will come in and help you and do these things. But I think communication is at its core. What you just said hits home in there are going to be things that me, Dan Strafford, specialist or director, don't get to know until they're released publicly or till they are disseminated to everyone. As long as the culture of your organization is sound, as long as everyone adheres and follows the same modes of proper communication and there's trust, I think most organizations will succeed in communicating properly. I do think there's a difference between the capital C communication, corporate communication, the lowercase c. And that's largely culturally driven, transparency, making sure information is available when it is able to be shared. So if I miss the email, I can go to the corporate intranet site, or I can go to a team meeting and it's all being shared in different ways. And I think you hit on messaging matters. I had a very interesting conversation with a former manager of mine about spin in corporate communication. The idea of, hey, here's a messaging, here's what we want people to think. I was like, I don't like that. I don't like that shouldn't the message just be what it's about?
Right.
Well, right, but we need to make sure they're hearing what we want them to hear. Again, and I balked at it, but when they were finished discussing and taking from what you said, it's about making sure people are hearing the message and are able to hear it, are in a place to hear it. And that's where the capital C corporate communication comes in, is the strategies, is the modes, is the ways of talking to the CEO and that C-suite and saying, hey, let's all be on the same page. Here's our messaging. Here's what we're talking about. We're all bought in. Great. Let's go forward. We're not bought in. Then we need to talk about it.
Yeah.
Then we need to discuss it. The lowercase c is that transparency, the Gemba boards, the idea of an intranet or a blog or a social site where people can share win stories from sales and share rollouts of new products or technologies. And I think that's the lowercase c, where it takes on a life of its own and is able to be something. It's so important. Communication is so important and so, I think, overlooked at times. We talked about the necessary evil before, but I think you hit on so much, and I'm a big fan of Andy Perkins and his approach to storytelling. I think storytelling has become a bit of an it thing in communications because that's how humans connect.
That's right.
We connect through storytelling. We connect through sharing of like or similar experiences or something that challenges our mind, something that comes out of nowhere and says, oh, piques our interest. So I'm very excited about this series, excited about the guests, and as always, looking forward to the conversation.
Thanks for that insight, Dan. You're a fantastic co-host. I love these Andy and Dan episodes. So why don't you take us out?
Sure. I always love to. Subscribe. We are rolling out the podcast on more podcasting apps. If it's not on your favorite app, feel free to reach out to us on LinkedIn. You can find Andy. You can find myself. Let us know. Give us the name. We'll make sure it's feeding there. But you're going to see it on more and more apps over the next few episodes. Should already see it there as you're listening to this one. But like, subscribe, rate, share on LinkedIn, tag Andy. Introvert no more. He will discuss all these topics and more on LinkedIn, obviously on andrewtemte.com. Don't forget Balancing Act, the book, available as you heard earlier, but also this new book, buckle up. It's coming soon. Andy and team working hard to make sure the balanced business is coming your way. So until next time, thanks so much for listening to The Balancing Act.